Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome on behalf of the entire team of the Circular Economy Initiative Germany. We are really happy that so many of you have joined for this session. Right now, we are already 40 participants, and we are really looking forward to what you will hopefully consider an interesting morning as we present and discuss our insights from roadmaps towards circularity, experiences from the Netherlands, the Nordics, and Germany. My name is Reinhard von Wittgen, and I'm scientific officer in this initiative. And it's my pleasure to provide you with some background information on our work before I hand over to Dr. Susanne Kadner, head of the Circular Economy Initiative, for presenting firstly our CE roadmap and moderating afterwards the panel with our distinguished. So let me briefly, before we start, outline the idea behind this event. 4 years ago, we embarked on an exciting journey as we set out with the initial question, how can we or how should we holistically as a society manage the needed transformation towards a circular economy in Germany, but also with Germany in a broader European perspective. 2 years later, it was May last year, we finally published our CE roadmap for Germany, which suggests concrete steps in the short, medium, and long term to achieve that goal. But however, even though our roadmap has been the first of its kind within Germany, we are fully aware, of course, that some other European countries have already gone through a similar strategy process as they have developed their own, what they call programs, action plans, strategies. Thus, in today's session, we not only want to present our own results, but also put it kind of into perspective, exchange ideas, the spirit of the World Circular Economy Forum events, and learn from each other. So for all these reasons, we are very happy to welcome our panelists who, I would say, share all a common goal of driving the transformation in their respective countries or respective field of action. Jeffrey Barth, thank you for joining our panel. You're managing partner at the Nordic Circular Hotspot and have actually co-founded this dialogue format within the Nordic countries to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. Great that we have you here today. Freek van Eyck, you're director at Holland Circular Hotspot. The Netherlands are a true frontrunner regarding the CE transformation. You were among the very first countries that outlined a national CE strategy. And yeah, therefore we are looking forward to learn from your insights, especially as you now move partly from the strategy phase to the action and implementation phase. Michael Kuhn is also here. He is Managing Director at the Collaborating Center on Sustainable Consumption and Production, but also a member of the European Circular Consumption and the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. And especially also in this role, you can certainly contribute interesting insights on the CE strategy discourse, especially on the EU level. Finally, as already said, Susanne Kadner, as head of the Circular Economy Initiative Germany, will present firstly the key results of our roadmap and will also moderate the discussion. So, as you all know, in 2020, the European Commission announced the European Green Deal and made it clear that the circular economy plays a central role in achieving the goal of greenhouse gas neutrality by 2050. For us, having started already in 2018, this was, of course, a great additional momentum as it fundamentally reshaped the narrative of circular business or circular economy more generally, not only as a nice asset in your sustainability reporting, but as a core driver for future societal well-being, innovativeness, competitiveness, and prosperity in general. So our initiative was or is well equipped to handle all these challenges. Managed by us, the National Academy of Science and Engineering, Architect, together with our knowledge partner, Mechanic, who also contributed very important knowledge. And our objective in the Circular Economy Initiative Germany to bring together stakeholders from all important spheres of society, that is business, academia, civil society, and as a recipient of our policy recommendations, of course, political decision makers, politics. In this context, special thanks also go to the Federal Ministry of Education and Research for generous co-funding beside our member organizations. So within our working structure of the initiative, we provided 3 content deep dives. So while one working group discussed barriers and potentials of circular business models in general terms and came up with an actor-specific typology of circular business models, other working groups choose very specific, yet very different application rollout of a circular. One working group was on traction batteries for electric mobility. That is a high value product, and the other working group has been on plastic packaging, being a rather low value product, which of course has implications on the incentive structure of recycling, reuse, and other circular economy strategies. Yet in both working groups, and this is very important to us, we involved actors from the entire value chain. So ultimately, all these working groups, circular business models, traction batteries, and packaging, and all these insights from these sectors were synthesized in our circular economy roadmap for Germany. And I think this is now where I may hand over to you, Susanne, for presenting results of our roadmap.
Thank you so much, Reinhard, for giving this overview. I'm gonna share my screen. So, can you see everything? Yeah. Okay. So let's get started. Well, for us in Germany, circular economy as such, or the Kreislaufwirtschaft as we call it, is certainly not something new. We've been talking about this for about 30 years. We have implemented the so-called yellow bag in the 1990s. And due to this, some of our efforts in establishing a circular economy have been really successful. So we have recycling rates for some of the municipal waste streams, which are about 80 to 90% for glass, for paper. And our overall recycling share of total waste in 2018 was about 70%. But, and this is important, if we now look at how the material that comes from these recycling processes, secondary materials, the recyclates, if we look at how they can actually replace primary or virgin materials, then the numbers look a bit disappointing. If you take indicators like DIREC or DEREC, depending on whether you include the global upstream chains, then it's only 13 or 18% of primary material that could be replaced through using secondary material. And then if you put this in context with statistics that are being used in the European level, like the circular material use rate, we do actually see that Germany is only just below the European average and far behind countries like the Netherlands. And I'm really looking forward to talk to our colleagues later on what they do so much better and how can we learn from them. So we do have indicators in our national sustainability strategy that really look at the use of resources. We've got the total material productivity indicator, and we've set ourselves the goal that this should increase by 1.6% per year by 2030. At the moment, we're actually overachieving. We are at 2.2%, but because this indicator is linked to GDP, this increase is basically due to the increase in GDP and not so much really the reduction in primary material use. So this means that in Germany, our raw material consumption per capita is still about double the global average. And if we look at the development of this indicator, we also see that there has not been much movement since about 2009. So this means while we have set up really promising strategies, a lot remains to be done. And this is where the circular economy, we think, comes in, because so far in Germany, we've mainly looked at recycling. So at the end of the product life cycle, and of course, the most systemic perspective is really necessary if we want to really make true progress here. So circular economy as such should help here, but of course, it's not an end in itself. We are bound by a range of national and international agreements related to climate, but related to biodiversity as well. So the circular economy really needs to pay into these overarching goals that have been set. So when we are trying to defining these overarching goals, of course, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions is important, but the reduction of toxic substances, of course, in particular, if you want to keep things, products in a loop, you have to remove toxic substances. The excess nitrogen implementation in the environment is one of the problems, plastics, of course, and the overall overexploitation and damage to ecosystems that we see. And here, resource conservation in terms of reduction, the input of resources, the utilization, the value retention through circularity are important levers, because what we want to see, of course, is that the amount of residual waste that we see is dramatically reduced. But also the European Commission has set itself the goals that the circular economy as such is not just paying into the sort of like more ecological or environmental goals, but also the social and economic sphere. And here, securing raw material supply and guaranteeing some independence from imports, supporting competitiveness and value creation are, of course, overarching goals, just as much as that the circular economy contributes to our quality of life and fair prosperity. So this is what we call now the overarching goals that a circular economy should pay into. But how do we get there? And this is where the implementation goals come into play. And they basically are structured along the different R strategies. And we've been inspired with this work, of course, by the framework that was developed by our Dutch colleagues as well. So reduce and redesign at the very front of these implementation goals, think things completely different, think products different, talk about services instead of selling products are key levers here. And then go into the product life cycle, reusing, remanufacturing, repair, and sharing as well. And it's only at the very end that you go down to the material level again and then talk about recycling. And in order for these R strategies, for these sort of like ecological goals to be reached, we need to look at the social and economic dimension as well. Collaboration needs to be improved. Innovation needs to be improved in this direction. And of course, information and transparency are key levers for this to really work. And the fourth point for me is very important as well, environmental education, because we as citizens, as users and consumers, we don't even sometimes know how to make the right decisions and are far from really being able to make sustainable consumption decisions. And here we really need to look at as well of how to build and strengthen these different areas. So this is like the overall target vision. We have identified several indicators in order how to define these underlying targets, but this will be some of the next steps in order our work to really select which indicators might be useful for this. Then we went on to do a modeling exercise with our partners from the Wuppertal Institute, because we wanted to know how far could these circular economy levers, as we call them, contribute to what we set as an overarching goal. So the reduction in greenhouse gas emission or the reduction in resource use. And the levers that were used for this modeling exercise were the extension of the product life cycle, the intensified use of products. So we need less to get the same services, and a drastically improved recycling with a far better and higher qualitative output at the end. So this is what we call the circular economy scenario. And then this scenario was mapped, and this is why I think it's so interesting, against a climate scenario. So our business as usual scenario is a climate scenario where we already have ambitious CO2 prices implemented of up to 140 euros, where we have efficiency measures in the building sector. And still we see, when we look at the year 2050, that here circular economy and its different levers can make a great contribution to reaching greenhouse gas neutrality. We still model this for the year 2050. Now we have this new target of 2045, but still this sort of the gap that circular economy levers can fill to reach this goal is quite significant here. This, of course, these savings are even more pronounced when we look at resource use, and I'm just going to direct your view to the right column here, where we see that about 70% of reduction are possible. And this sort of splits up to, on the one hand, savings through concrete measures like intensified use, like extended product life cycles. And then the other half is really these drastically improved and qualitatively high recycling processes and products that come from them. So now I'm going to introduce you to a little bit these different perspectives that we've taken in our working groups. And Reinhard just said this before. We had 3 deep dives. One is on circular business models, providing this really overarching view. And then we had these deep dives in traction batteries and plastics packaging. And yeah, these are very diverse systems. We have traction batteries with metals, a very high incentive to keep this in a loop. Especially for the owners. And we have plastic packaging, which most of the time you just rip open and throw it somewhere, where it then ends up in the environment. So we need to think about totally different incentives here of closing the loops for this material. And as you see, with these working groups having taken very different perspectives, in order to synthesize this and then to derive common insights for our roadmap, we've structured the results from these reports on 4 levels. One was the product level, the product perspective, where we looked at the necessary hardware and software requirements. We looked at the business model perspective, obviously. How can we set up circular business models? What is relevant for that? Which relationships with customers and partners do you need? How do you raise awareness within business? Then we have the socio-technical perspective. That's more the framing, really, the political framework conditions, technical developments, value networks. And then the social perspective. What is the required social and cultural change that we need from that? And now I'm going to lead you through these very crowded files, and you don't have to read through them. You don't have to go into any depth. But what I want to show you is that despite these different perspectives of the working groups, we arrive at similar insights. So if we take the circular business models and start at the bottom right corner with the social dimension, we need new formats of participation, bottom-up initiatives where citizens can act, can push the circular economy forward. We need to have transparency for product labeling and the relevant declarations on that. We need education and training programs, and we need institutions who consolidate this information. If we move to the socio-technical dimension, economic incentives are an important aspect. The X-Tax approach, I'm going to go into that in more depth later on. We need standards. We need public procurement as a demand pull. We need business model innovations, and of course need quality standards, and we know and standards that we know what the quality of remanufactured or recycled materials is. Going to the product level, design for circularity, of course, is key. We all know that. And digital technologies will act as key enablers to set this all up. If we go to the business model level, this is sort of the approach that our working group has taken. They have identified different circular strategies, starting from recycling as the lowest level where the value is retained, moving up through remanufacturing, reuse, repair, maintenance, and upgrade. And combined with these circular strategies, you can offer different service levels in a company. And the goal would be that you move away from this product-oriented services where the focus is on sales, where you maybe offer a repair service with it, but then go to possibly use-oriented services like sharing, like renting, like leasing, and then move to the result-oriented services, where you just basically for the performance of your product, this is what the customer pays you for, but the product itself remains in your ownership, and you're totally responsible for it to be working, for it getting repaired, and there the incentive to produce a long-lasting and high-quality product are very high. And with these perspectives and the different actor perspectives that come along with it, our working group developed a typology of 22 business model types according to new roles of the actors in this system, for producers, for logistic providers, and then offering the different circular strategies combined with these different service levels. So moving to the packaging group. Again, if we take education as the basis, we need to increase the user understanding. We have, again, on the socio-technical level, the economic incentives that are required. Specific for this working group is, of course, the question on harmonization of material, reduce the diversity, so you improve the quality of the recycling streams, support and incentives for the consumers, and of course, specialized education and training, for example, for industrial designers as well. If we here go to the product level, again, the design for circularity is key, but we also need some sort of uniform guidelines for designers, but also for consumers, how alternatives, sustainable alternatives for packaging could look like. And we need to, of course, have a massive investment in this sorting and recycling technology, because we all know there's still a great potential to be tapped from mechanical recycling. And this picture on the right just shows you that despite thinking that packaging is such a simple thing, it's just plastic wrapped around a product, it's complex, especially if it's a food product. It has to comply with certain technical safety standards. You have to optimize it for transport. You have the sufficient mechanical properties. And of course, it's also something that needs to provide information. It's the surface which interacts with the customer. And this is something you have to keep in mind when you design new circular packaging alternatives. So now moving on to the traction batteries. Here, of course, design for circularity is some of the key aspects, again, on the product level. And the necessary information is then specifically spelled out with the battery passport, which has also been mentioned in the new battery regulation of the European Commission. On the business model level, of course, we need to look at models, new business models, both B2B and B2C, because the consumer or the user of this battery in his car is going to be a core element of ensuring a circular management of these products. And there's really the need to invest largely in disassembly capacities, probably Europe-wide, and make sure that the reverse logistics are in place in order to provide this circular management. On the social level, practical training, basic and applied knowledge are, of course, key again. And then if we go to the socio-technical level again, one core element is, again, definitions. What do we talk about? What do we talk about when we mean recycling processes? What do we mean when we talk about input rates, recycled content? We need definitions for all these terms. We need terms or definitions of what the recycling process is. And this is where our working group set up this sort of like, develop this right image here as well, saying that we really talk about recycled material when we hold the high value materials in our hand. In this case, it will be cobalt, nickel, and lithium, for example. At the same time, product passports are important. We do not only need to know where the resources come from that we put in this product, in this case in the battery, and make sure that standards in the ethical standards in the value chain are ensured, but we also know what has happened to this battery throughout its life cycle. Has it undergone extreme temperature changes, weather problems with charging? So we can make educated decisions out of economic and environmental perspectives of what the best way of using this battery after the first life cycle is. Do I just need to replace certain modules? Can I take it? Do I need to take it straight away into the recycling process? Or maybe is it possible to use it in a stationary application in a battery farm, for example? So, and based on these insights, we've developed now our overarching 10 action points, really, and I'm gonna guide you through these quickly. Circular business models, of course, here business is the actor, it's a circular economy. Business needs to provide these innovation spaces within the companies, but also across companies to experiment with these circular business models, to experiment how can we establish these kind of value networks, circular value networks that we talk about. Of course, then move from this product-oriented approach to data-driven, use and result-oriented service business models. And of course, taking redesign of products as a core element of these different strategies. Second action point is standardization. I've just mentioned this. We need a classification of what used and remanufactured products are, but we also need to develop quality standards for remanufactured products so that me as a customer, either B2B or B2C, I have trust in this product that I'm buying, and I know what the features are that come with it. We need specifications for recycled material content and quality. Of course, here's this trust aspect again. And then we get to the point of measuring KPIs at the business level. How do I show to my customers that with this product, with this business strategy, I'm making true progress towards a circular economy, but also the relevant CE metrics at the national level. Transparency. How do I make relevant information available? Product passports, I've mentioned this before. How can I exchange this relevant data and information between the new actors in this value chain, but also with the customer? How can I provide transparent labeling and information, and so provide this information in a way that it's clear to the customer how to make their purchasing decisions? Regulatory instruments, of course, a unified regulatory framework is necessary here. At this point, a product focus for the entire life cycle would be really helpful. Coherent product policy at national and EU level, design for circular economy, digital product ID, and move also our perspective from the quantitative focus on recycling to qualitative recycling rates. Economic incentives, and here the X-Tax approach is one that we see as very promising. If we want to show how this economy should be moving, if we want to provide the right incentives, what needs to happen is that the resources, that the duties on the use of resources, on emissions need to increase. But at the same time, of course, you have to make sure that business and companies still have the possibility to invest in these new circular economy business models, for example. So one approach would here as kind of an ecological tax reform to reduce the tax burden for businesses in relation to the factor labor, because we all know some of the repair services are very labor intensive. So if reduce the costs for labor, or if you reduce the tax on providing these services, this helps to give businesses the sort of like moving space to invest in the necessary circular business models, for example. We need a massive investment in infrastructure, both in recycling, obviously. We need to tap this potential that we still have with mechanical recycling, but we also need an infrastructure for reuse, for continued use, for remanufacturing, and the required reverse logistics networks. And here dissemination of digital technologies, of course, plays a key role again, also for the identification and sorting in the mechanical recycling infrastructure, of course. Yeah, progress in technical development and research, especially material level, but also looking at the different processes. Here we need innovations, but we need the methods and tools for the implementation of a circular economy. I've mentioned metrics before, but sometimes probably we need to have model-based decision-making platforms, in particular where there's the case, what do I do with a product after the end of its first life? What would be the best strategy out of an economic or environmental perspective to keep this in the loop. Public procurement can create a great demand pull, and the idea would be to have to set strategic objectives and binding targets for use, for remanufactured, for recycled products, but also to allow public procurement to really tap into this potential of new circular services, because this has not been tapped as extensively as it could be so far. And institutionalization on the national level, we think, is key, because this is a big transformation that we are going through that lasts longer than election periods. And we think to have one institution which can really invest into knowledge sharing, create the new connections between actors, embed the CE discourse more widely, and also set it in a European context is key. And it's really with this perspective also that we look forward to talk to Catherine and Fried later on, with a view to what circular hotspots can deliver in this context. And then last, but really not least, education and transfer, knowledge transfer are key. We need to set up new circular economies courses, study programs, professorships in academia. We need to include it in vocational training, but we need to be aware as well that we don't create silos here again. Setting up new courses, a new office is important, but we also need to diffuse this knowledge in existing courses, in engineering, in business administration. So really, in the future, scholars, students come out from their training with this circular economy perspective. We need to support transformative learning and set up real-world laboratories, because we can teach, but it's only testing it with the different actors, with the different partners in the value chains, with us as citizens, as consumers, as users, that we learn, that we know whether certain strategies will work. Yeah, and with these 10 action points, they are actually supported by 57 concrete policy recommendations that we've mapped on a timeline up to 2030, with a view of how can we, in the short time, lay the foundations for this, how can we create the necessary structure, and then maybe, and we hope so, create a breakthrough by the year 2030. This is what you find in our circular economy roadmap, and of course, I'll invite you to read it, and hope you enjoy it. And with this, I'm finishing the presentation and quickly hand over to you, Reinhard.
Yeah, thank you, Susanne, for this interesting presentation on our economy roadmap. And it's now that we go to the second part of our event. With all these new insights, recommendations in mind, we would like to discuss with our guests how, they see this recommendations and what's their take on that. Maybe comparison, maybe similarities, differences to your specific country background. There was actually one question, Susanne, maybe regarding to your question or for the panel discussion. I would say maybe we could also take that to the panel discussion. It was, what role do you see for reusing carbon as part of the circular economy? The circular economy contributing to the climate change mitigation, for instance, use of sustainable biomass, plastic waste, and capture of CO2 to produce plastics. Do you want to answer directly, or shall we take that to the panel discussion?
Let's take this to the panel discussion. I think because I think first I would like to sort of like get the different perspectives, sure, because this question is really sort of like, what are the different strategies? Yeah. And I think this would fit well towards the end of the panel discussion. Frick, let me start with you. You have plenty experience. Well, you have for a long time now a circular economy program. You've developed transition agendas. You've been head of the Holland Circular Hotspot for some time. And you know what we've done here with our roadmap. This is an important, but it's a first step as well. And so this question really goes to you as a circular front runner, as we call you. What are your most important learnings, really, from starting from the publication of your programs, drafting the transition and agendas up to the present day? Can you provide us with some insights here?
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Well, maybe for not everybody is aware with what happened in the Netherlands, I give a little bit of historic perspective. And I think, well, if you look at our country, we are a very vulnerable delta. We shouldn't be allowed to exist, but we are too stubborn. So very early on, we had to work together just to survive, to keep our feet dry. early industrialized, heavily populated. So we have to work together to keep our cities livable and economy viable. So we've been working, I think, like Germany, on waste management for over 150 years. From hygiene focus to environmental focus to a more integral waste management focus, and now to a circular focus. And in the Netherlands, I think it's actually the large multinationals who were forward-looking, who started to adopt a circular economy, but also the impatient young guys who wanted to change the world, the young startups. And when our government saw that there was so much momentum, both from the larger companies and from the startup, they said, hey, let's embrace it, see this as an opportunity. So in 2016, they had this hugely ambitious governmental strategy to be fully circular in 2015, and to be in 2030 to be halfway in the non-renewable resource use. So it's really a moonshot. And how did they do that? They realized very soon that they couldn't do it alone. So first they formed something like a resource alliance with private actors as well. And together they said, let's focus this on a number of market segments where there is economic potential, sustainability potential, but also transition readiness, momentum, if you want. And together they were making up plans. And there were plans for operationalize the strategy, for plastics, for biomass, for buildings and infrastructure, for consumer goods and manufacturing. And basically they said, for the next 4 years, what are we going to do? What are we going to focus on? And these plans will have to be updated every 4 years. And they have to be, let's say, they have been implemented by our government. And we're working on that right now. But then again, focus is good, ambition is good, but you have to tweak the system. So our government in parallel had some incentives. So that's working on regulation, obviously. It's also setting the right incentives, the carrot and the stick. It's working on internationalization over the border. It's working on behavior change and working on access to finance. So quite a lot of steps. And if you look where we are now at this moment, I think we are 24.5% circular. Our resource use, as you've shown in the graph, is around 28%, which is for our economy, secondary resource use, which is quite good. But in economical terms, we're just 5% circular, if you look at our GDP. For some larger companies like Philips, it is 20% of their revenue line. So that's starting to look good. Some startups are 100% circular. But obviously, we are not there yet. And what we realize now that we have had a phase of facilitation of front runners and helping them. Probably if you want to move the mass further, we have to be a little bit more prescriptive. You have to look towards more target setting for circular economy. But target setting is very different. If you look at the large overall goals, which you might have as a country, is reduce greenhouse gases, prevent degradation of biodiversity, save the environment, or access to resources for industry. And you can translate that in, well, maybe circular economy objective, less primary resource use for industry, or focus on reuse or focus on recycling. But that's still very generic, and that's often translated in at a product level, like the obligation for producers to have a longer warranty, or a percentage of secondary resources, or better waste collection. But you always have to see them, let's say, combined. If you only focus on more recycling target, you're going to make for plastics only lots of plastic buckets, and in the end, you're not reaching any goal objective behind it. So what we realized that we have to be specific with these goals, and probably that means specific targets for specific product groups like electronics or textiles or the building materials. And that's basically where we're going now. So a little bit more prescriptive, setting targets at product groups. I think what we learned so far is, of course, you need top down and bottom up. In the end, it's not only government, but businesses will be responsible for scaling up. So do involve them from the start, businesses. That's very important. And it's collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. So in the value chains from the beginning to the end, it's collaboration internationally, because resource flows are international. And it's also collaboration between government, knowledge institute, consumers, businesses. That's very important. And maybe also it's not only about technical innovation, it's also probably for 80% social innovation. Mm-hmm. That's something we have to realize as well. So I think I keep it with that for this moment as a first reaction.
Yeah, there's many points where I can tap into, but let's let's allow the others to come into this discussion. Catherine, yeah, nice to have you here today as well. well, when we talked about this before, you know, we talked about Norway setting up its new circular economy program, and that they chose what you also described as a vertical approach, right? So focusing on the different industries as drivers for change. When we set up our roadmap in Germany, like I just showed you, you know, we had 2 content deep dives. It was even on the product level, not even sort of like a specific sector. We then try to combine the insights that we have and develop the sort of like our action points and policy recommendations through this sort of horizontal or more systemic perspective. When other countries or organizations are now thinking about like, how do I set up these strategies, or how do I work up a roadmap? What, in your view, are the respective benefits of these different approaches? This vertical, where you can make it very concrete, the more horizontal, where you have the sort of systemic perspectives. I'd be interested to hear that from you.
Thank you so much, Susanne, and also thank you, Fredrik, so inspiring every day time to listen the brave Dutch frontrunners. So here we go, try to walk in the paths of those who went ahead. And on behalf both of Norway, but also on the Nordic, the different Nordic countries, they do have chosen a variety of strategies. And I would remind, as Fredrik had a backdrop, what was the situation of Holland or Netherlands. In Norway, remember, Norway has not been, it's not an EU member, so it has not been part of the benefits of the very, very ambitious policy move that started in 2015, very much driven both by Finland and by Netherlands and EU Commission. So Norway really had to some kind of reinvent its own path into this strategic alliance or strategic movement, being very much, and I think it's very common to spend a lot of time in the end of life and not in the beginning of life. So it has very much been driven by regulations hitting the waste industry, and it took a very, very long time before we saw this as some kind of societal and a business development opportunity. So it has been very rewarding to start reading the strategies from the Netherlands from 2016, which really emphasized the motivations. They do vary. It's not one size fits all. And reading how the Dutch societal move was driven by geopolitical risks, which is really a Nordic sense of urgency. Also risk in supply chains. And we all have been feeling that during the last 2 or 3 years with COVID, that the systems that we used to rely on, they are not so reliable anymore. And finally, complex climate situations. So in this matter, understanding circular economy, how it can be embraced from multiple approaches. And as you also mentioned, now it is some kind of extending, not only be about a product or a material, but we are seeing, is it packaging or is it a carbon issue? So I'd love to see how do we extend these talks. And as far as I will sometimes point very much to the same week Germany got its roadmap, Norway finally got their own strategy just 1 month before the election. So the former government, it took them about 4 years to prepare for this strategy. And it has been some kind of dwelling a little bit around, but as you mentioned, it has been very vertically oriented, and maybe that was needed because in lack of a top-down overarching policy, this was maybe a wake-up call for the variety of industries. Is it trade? Is it transport? Is it construction? But then it was it's 167 pages long. It has no new institutions. It has no new funding. So it is about something incremental approach, but maybe that's what you need to anchor new thoughts. And it takes time to get to some kind of transition maturity level, as Fredrik is talking about. So when I tried to compare these, so they're 27-page strategy from Germany that was really standing on shoulders of well-prepared work. I would laugh sometimes, Susanne, and say how the Germans are good at planning, how to plan for even better planning. And this is a fantastic example how it generates 10 bullet points, which are generic. And you may apply them to whatever sector or vertical. And this is also how we might see there is a fuss in the variety of roadmaps. I say when I walk and talk about the German strategy, I would say this is a real Autobahn approach. So just follow what's happening on the continent. And I say, so the Norwegian would be more like a parkour or like walking in the hills and a step around. So, and this, anyhow, it takes time to get here, and it's going to be really quite a thrill, but also a challenge to get to the next level. And this is maybe why we aligned in the Nordics, saying that no one can do this alone, but trying to rely on the market, and how can we facilitate in lack of strong policy, but very like good intentions. But we have a alliance, which is the Nordic Council of Ministers. They have ambition. Nordic will become the most integrated and sustainable region in the world. I'm not so much about competing who will be the best, but I'm really about this is also a handshake for any collaborators, because you cannot be integrated without collaboration. And as Fredrik also emphasized, we need to start with radical collaboration. And when we even just put our enormous region, it will be such a risk for the paradoxes and the dilemmas we are facing. We're seeing now huge industry movements going out to go, if you find it like hard to go mining on land, we will have difficult elephant-filled debates about deep sea mining, and who has the rights to do what when we're going into the renewable society, what kind of compromises will we see? And approaching these some kind of dilemmas and paradoxes, we really need to have, I learned also from Fredrik a couple of weeks ago, honest talks. Because leaving, and we haven't approached the point where Frans Timmermans was really emphasizing, we are decoupling economic growth from resource consumption. This is going to hurt, and there are multiple ways, but we have to understand that transitioning old industries, which have been like earning their profits from a linear economy, they will have total other challenge, like fixing a linear system, than those who can really have a brand new dawn and restart their future on fully circular principles. Yeah. So that is maybe my comment to what we are seeing. Finally, and with the reason, and also working with the Nordics, it is there are some benefits. We have some cultural comparative advantages, but also the Nordic regions has not historically been very collaborative. So we also have to mend our history and paint a Nordic vision where we actually are in the same boat among diverse consumers, the high consumers, very resource-rich nations, and also some transition elements will need to happen here as well.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. This is exactly what I'm going to get back to you later, because you're going to tell us a lot about this cooperation aspect. Michael, nice to have you here as well. Well, we both know we have a new government in place. We have, and this new government specifically addresses the setting up of a circular economy strategy in its coalition treaty, which we think is great. Exactly. So, and it mentions very specific points like digital product passports, quotas for recyclates, and so on and so forth in this coalition treaty, as well as the strategy, as I just mentioned. So, but now, of course, I would be really interested to know from you, from your perspective, also from the Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform, which are the elements that you think such a strategy needs to contain in order for it to be successful?
Yes, thanks, Susanne. And first of all, I would like to echo very much what Fredrik and Catherine have said before. Also, you know, is it a top down or bottom up? And also to say, well, it's probably both. And the question, how can we encourage this type of behavior, let's say, because we have been living for centuries in a linear economy, even so maybe our grandparents have been a bit more circular than we are today. And looking on latest studies, I mean, under 30 years old people, they have never, ever repaired something. They have not looked into even partly the recycling economy, beside maybe that they separate waste. So it's kind of still an inspiration level, which we need. We also need a skill level to target. And if you ask, you know, with the new government, or also what we do at the European level within the stakeholder platform, it's very much about knowledge exchange. It's about pioneering. It's about learning from each other. It's about testing and prototyping. It's about also creating roundabout myth, which are out there, that sharing wouldn't work, leasing is very difficult. If you lease a jeans instead buying a jeans, you have a lot of hygiene problems. So you run into lots of different topics. Or if you are a company and you have understood a circular business model and you really would like to go for it, and we have worked with a number of construction companies wanting to go there, suddenly they run into lots of barriers because the construction law doesn't allow certain type of ownership structures. The architect and its conventional contracts is also forbidding this type of leasing model. And we had, for example, for hotels, there was an initiative just to rent out windows, not to own windows, and the whole facade as well, the outer shell of the whole building. And then you see that we still have a whole law system which is built on a linear economy. So we need to go, unfortunately, into bits and pieces, even with the lawyer, to see where the prevention of circularity is given. And if we go there, then we will see, yeah, on recycling, the door is a little bit more open because that has been practiced and preached, as you said, in the German setting already for years. But if you go into repair and reuse and new ownership models, there the picture looks quite different. And then it's a question, you know, do we own the skills already of going there? Do we own it in a governmental setting? Do we own it in a business setting? Do we own it as consumers? And probably the answer is still no. So what you said in your roadmap, building education, building skills, I think it's quite essential for the way ahead. But it also goes, I mean, you build your skill if you have a motivation, you know, if you find this. Sometimes today I have the feeling digitalization is a strong motivation for everyone to build skills. But if you go into circularity, still sometimes the eyebrows are getting up and, oh, we had this in Germany for years. Why do we need to enter this topic? You know, tell me something new. It's an old-fashioned approach. So, and then it translates into understanding, well, yeah, recycling is one part, but yeah, there's new ownership models, new type of design infrastructure, creating new insights about the chemicals which prevent, it's not only the law, but also certain chemicals might prevent circularity. It's also about the whole narrative of lifetime still, so that we have only a warranty system of 2 years. If you go and buy a car from an Asian manufacturer, he offers you 8 years. So how about? Why can we not talk? And in the coalition treaty document, I also see that there's a quest for flexible warranty times. And yes, I think it's very essential to tell a refrigerator needs a warranty time maybe of 6 years at least, in order, and that stimulates thinking again, because then suddenly you create a responsibility model where you say, hey, I need to be responsible for 6 years. And again, then we need to go into the skills. We lately had a discussion with the handcraft sector. So they are also now, I think the handcraft sector, the mechatronic guys, you know, everyone who is doing not the design strategy, but doing it practically, we need also to onboard. So we need to see that we talk to the labor ministry to build with labor unions and other organizations also new skills there. Beside the management approach to it, besides stimulating via financial economic instruments, maybe VIT, we can again look into the Swedish or many other Austria system, making reducing VIT on repair. I think that could be also an interesting stimulation point. And then, as we had already, you know, this point coming up on climate change, I think if we look on climate change and if business is calculating and they see their scope 3 emissions, they will soon realize that maybe sometimes 60–70% of their emission are related to scope 3. And if you make this kind of combination that with circularity, that actually a circular product helps you on your Scope 3 emission, then there's another level of motivation. Then you might want to look into it, and then you can calculate if a recycling business model or repairable or a new ownership business model might support you on your journey. So overall, I think it's lots still about encouragement, pioneering work, prototyping, learning. And I saw some comments on the university level also, how can we, and you also brought this up. Yes, of course, we need to interlink it to those courses. I think there are prototypes already out there, but you know, here in Wuppertal, where I'm based, there's an interesting approach also with Circular Valley, bringing startups, researcher and business, conventional business together to really prototype actions on circularity. And that's probably what very much is still needed and where the government also can support.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So yeah, from your responses, what I'm taking is fixed targets, both fixed targets for the national strategy, but also for businesses. Scope 3 footprinting is important here, so to be able to show the progress. Michael, you've just mentioned the VAT reductions for repair. So taking the leeway in the tax system in order to support circular strategies is something important. What I thought it was interesting, and so I'm diverting from the questions we wanted to discuss a little bit when I'm looking at Freek now. The smart regulation program. In our pre-study, we already loved it. And maybe you can sort of like evaluate a little bit on this, because what was said just now, I really like the wording. We are still living in a linear legal system. We have linear regulations. So the smart regulation program, or what the real world labs, what you sometimes have, these innovation spaces that you can develop there, and the liberty in terms of regulation. Is this something that has sort of stimulated innovation from your experience? And then I also would like to ask you the question in terms of the cooperation, but maybe let's start first with a smart regulation program.
Well, I think some lessons we learned in circular economy is that we have a clear goal, but not a predetermined path. So everything is new. So it's a way that we know that things have to change, but we don't know how. So it actually that we need room for experimentation, and also the realization that nobody can do this alone, not government, not businesses. So it's something we have to try to find out together. And what I like about the Dutch is the collaborative approach. Obviously, public-private collaboration is really in our genes, but also a mentality like just do it, learn fast, fail fast. You either win or you learn. And I think that's with regulation allow also, if you want to have a system approach, you can tweak the system. And for instance, on an environmental indicator, you will see that 9 of them out of 10 will dramatically improve. But there might be one, number 10, which has a slight, let's say, a change towards the negative side. And if you are a regulator and you're going to punish this initiative because one of the 10 indicators is going in the wrong direction, then you kill the whole idea. So in order to develop something, you have to look at a holistic way also at, I think, regulation and give room for experimentation. And of course, the devil is in detail, because electronics is different than textiles, different than building materials. But the fact that you have to work on this together is very important. If you look at industrial symbiosis, it's very easy to say that waste for one is a resource for the other. But for the regulator, waste for one is waste for the other. So you need a waste permit. And if you look at from a company level, what about liability? If you use the waste from another and your plant explodes, how you deal with that? So you need trust in a safe zone and a neutral entity to discuss this thing. So what I think this mentality that if you sort it out together, that you know that you have to change in a new direction is very important. Because in the end, regulation is looking with, let's say, old spectacles to new initiatives. So regulators, you have basically bolted down the past. And then all of a sudden you have a new reality with new digital business models, for instance, or new bio-based materials, which of course, do not fit the present regulation. So if you know that up front, you need to incorporate time to find out new ways together. And you can't put it unilaterally on the government. If you have a new bio-based regulation, you have to prove for 10 certification systems that you comply, you're 10 times 100,000 euros further in testing, and your business model is down the drain. So you need to work on some standardization in the process as well. So that's first reaction to the new approach. And in this process, and I think this is also something which has been brought to the attention by Jacqueline Kramer, it's very important that you have, call it, transaction brokers or neutral entities who stimulate this discussion. If you look at circular economy, it's not too difficult to get a coalition of companies along that realize that there need to be a change. So you can get them along. To get them work together is pretty difficult. I remember 2 weeks ago we were in Dubai, and there was a session organized by Ladeya Godina Kosir, my co-chair of European Circular Stakeholder Platform, on building with wood. And if you look at stakeholders there, well, they're developers, investors, designer, asset owners, insurance, clients. You all need them on board if you want to change the system. And you can get them along, but to make them work together, you need a neutral entity, a transaction broker, and somebody who can link the top-down level to the bottom-up level, somebody who's trusted by all parties. And that's actually the work that we also do as hotspots. We are a neutral broker, a trusted party who knows the content, who can bridge it. And transaction brokers do not replace top-down government actions. I think in the end, governments are the guardians for the greater goods. You always need them, but you need to combine them with all this bottom-up energy. And these transaction brokers, I think, are very important here. Network governance, that's how Jacqueline Kramer calls it. It's the oil in the machine in a way that makes it happen. And also in discussions, public-private, to find out new directions for regulation, I think these transaction brokers have a role to play. You see it at national level, like your initiative. You see it at regional level, the level of a city where everything comes together. And we're doing this as well as the European Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform. Like Michael was pointing out, we share knowledge, and what's working in the Nordics can work in Slovenia, and what's working in Poland can work in Belgium. And if we exchange rapidly, let's say we shorten the time to market. And that's why this exchange is so important, because no country can do it alone. We always say it makes no sense to make a circular island of the Netherlands if the rest of the world goes down the drain. So we have to reach out. We are exporters, we don't have resources, so we're all in this together. So yeah. I guess I go back to you.
Thank you, Freek. This is fantastic, because I mean, it's exactly some of the discussions we've had when setting up the roadmap for Germany. It's a first step. We have a roadmap for Germany, but of course we need a global roadmap towards circularity. But it'll be difficult to build that from scratch. So we started with Germany first. Handing over to Catherine. You've just mentioned before, you have not been famous for collaborating in the Nordics, but now you actually initiated your Nordic Circular Hotspot and show how collaboration can work there. So it's like, what are your experiences so far? And in particular, sometimes it's being said that, collaboration can happen through increased transparency, for example, because you have all these digital technologies will help you, you get all the information for products. But Freek already pointed this out. There's something, how do you really set up collaboration? You have transition brokers. Are you the transition broker for the Nordics now? Your mic is still off.
Thank you. I really hope so. The Nordic Circular Hotspot has really been inspired by Holland Circular Hotspot. So we feel we are some kind of another color of the egg in the same nest. And it is very interesting to understand the governance of these neutral initiatives. And I really feel that we have moved into the family of how the Jacqueline Kramer is categorizing the needs of network governance and evolving a new kind of roles and leaderships that we haven't seen so much before, which has the power of neutrality. And it's some kind of, if you look at Holland Circular Hotspot, which has been very much initiated by government and aligned by government, you will see the infrastructure department is like all over the place when you do collaborations. I would say if we wouldn't have the instrument of Nordic innovation, which is funding collaboration across borders, this this egg would probably not have found its nest, because in the incentives instruments, there are many barriers from going linear to circular. But we are really seeing not only the dawn of day, but really having the opportunity to grow fast and together across Nordics, because we're supported by this funding instrument by the Nordic Ministry Council. And it has not been evolved from one place or the other, but it was several stakeholders coming from a variety of our countries. And we actually we met again and again, because we went to Netherlands to learn from the front runners. So we're standing there looking at each other, and here we are again. So why do we meet and collaborate in Amsterdam and Den Haag, and why don't we do this in our own region? So it was very clear that we had the same kind of challenges and the same kind of being too fragmented. So we would have been, we were really lucky to see that there already was a body of which is not too strict. It's very agile to evolve within the hotspot. So it's a new kind of entity. It's both very formal, but both informal, but it really has the agility to embrace the variations of stakeholders who is building this up. So from Finland's side, it's actually the government instrument Business Finland. And then from Sweden, it would be more like ECO and ECO organizations and environmental push. From Denmark, it is like the design-driven skill field, which is pushing this, and also state-funded. In Norway, it might be more the entrepreneurial side, which is really coming from city development and innovation. And from Iceland, it's the financial community. So this makes a quite interesting crossover. And I think we are more, it might look weird because, oh, this is not construction, this is not state. So maybe what we're hoping for the next year or two is to get more aligned with our governments. So we can see how we can only not be a market-driven, R&D-driven organization, but also to see how we can emphasize an opportunity to collaborate with governments as well, because they will be those who will be implementing the new EU directives. We see, you talked about it. It's the taxonomy. We will have the law of transparency starting to work from 1st of July. And maybe our concern, meeting all the huge movements. You have seen Ellen MacArthur Foundation with huge partner programs. We really love to collaborate with a lot of the Dutch. They're really walking the talk, as Fredrik said, about sharing knowledge, and we work with Circular Economy, with the other stakeholders as well. But also World Business Council Sustainable Development really went far very early. But what we see in the Nordics, that most people are actually employed in a SME. So one thing is now the huge regulations, they're hitting into large corporations and large industries. But most of us live within broken value chain and in small companies. So we might fear that if we don't put up a more equal way of doing incentives, and how could we actually put up support programs, and how could we really emphasize the importance of practical collaboration and support for those who do the transition, we will see really a class, someone will be dropping out because they will have to walk this alone. So I think it's a good community building up through the hotspot umbrella.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Michael, you have a lot of experience from your work at the Collaborating Center as well, in setting up such multi-stakeholder collaboration, not just with big business, but with SMEs as well. And you coordinate innovation and transition labs. So you provide ample of this space for collaboration. I'd be just interested in your perspective on this as well. Which role can we take in providing this neutral space for establishing trust, for setting up this collaboration, for providing the room for knowledge transfer and mutual learning?
Yeah, basically you said it all already almost in your question. We need to set it up exactly to build this mutual learning. We sometimes, and Fred called it, and Catherine called it a transition lab. We call it just sometimes clubs, because you meet in a club infrastructure and you start to discuss common challenges, but also common solution. And the more diverse the group is, the better it is from the result perspective. So we bring researchers, business, NGOs, city decision maker, because I saw some comments also there. We haven't discussed so much the role of city or regions in this, because of course, many of the stuff we own end up in the infrastructure of a city. And just to discuss it, then on a sectoral level. So we have set up clubs on food, on electronics, on packaging, for example. And it's really interesting to see, first of all, it takes us always a half a year to a year before we talk about the real issues. So this trust building exercise of, people you don't know, you haven't met, sometimes even your competitors are sitting at the table, and now suddenly you should share insights. And we heard this before, talk about the real true problem also, but also to look if there are joint opportunity spaces to go for. So for example, in packaging, we had a number of retailers, we had a number of fast food companies, we had the packaging provider, we had the marketing guys, the designer, the researcher, the Fraunhofer Institutes in the German setting, and we started to discuss. And it took us a long time, but we also had to go out to a waste treatment site where we opened the garbage bags. And we sorted waste ourselves, because we had a lot of assumption about things, how people sort, and the sorting quota you just showed. And then if you open a bag, it looks actually quite different, and you wonder about the statistics sometimes. And, this kind of trust building exercises, almost even through gamification, through looking into real cases, helped to a real understanding and a real discussion. And yes, for this, you need a neutral ground. You need somebody to pick on all this. And some people left, they came back after some time. Some realized, oh, okay, it goes to the core of my business model here, the discussion. I don't feel comfortable, or I'm even not in the situation in my company to be able to discuss this at this table. So we had people going in and out. It took us 3 years to get the group into such a stable condition that now we will publish policy recommendations also as one of the outcomes, where everyone is surprised what is in there, that even business is contra-signing the statements. And again, that was a long discussion based on what I just said on the trust building exercise also. There's one other important element I haven't brought into so much. It's the consumption perspective, which we also look a lot into. So circular behavior. So how also do you get the consumer involved into it? Because many business models only will work if you get the citizen, the consumers also in it. And again, there's the same story, same on the myths and issues on the production side. You also need to go into and test and prototype. So in packaging, we have tested different type of messages. We had the big retailers all in, and they tested at different times, different type of messages, how to separate the packaging. And then now we are trying to standardize the message as well among the different retailer. We had a startup like Refurbed, reselling refurbished devices as well, testing different messages, how to best get back the stuff, also how to create a buyback model even of refurbished stuff, and what is the messaging about. And the others participated and learned from it. And again, I think on both sides, and that goes also very much into the Sustainable Product Initiative of the European Commission, which will be published again this year. So we need to look from both perspectives into the circularity. And again, as said, how to have this transition discussions among different partners, and action collaboration as well.
Mm-hmm. Catherine, you just raised your hand. You wanted to say something?
Yes, it's always inspiring listening to Mikael, seeing and listening and learning how evolving this in this specific area through the consumption, lens of consumption, but also since we also have collaborated on electronics. And I like the word assumption. So I just did it like this. I want to talk about assumptions. And maybe there is like, there are so many assumptions out there. And why do we have to embrace now the standardization, which is the number 2 in the German roadmap? It will come, and making the market just, well, this is coming. The numbers are coming. But how do we use this waiting time or this preparation time to really be open, start collaborating, but also setting real core targets? We recently, Freek could message that his market is like 24% circular, and they even can break it down to companies. And so far we are really on the other side of this edge, which is like 2.4 circular in Norway. During this spring, Sweden will have its gap report. And I don't think the point of these reports is to have another report to put in the shelf, but it's like, how is this part of a Kotter change transition strategy? So you have to have a sense of urgency about what is our core problem, and start to embracing these problems and embracing the complexity within this. And when we start walking into this fog, then the room is really filled with assumptions, tying me back to Mikael here. How could we get a language and numbers? I love the color charts, X-rays from Circular Economy, which is some kind of giving, as you also have emphasized in the German strategy or roadmap, is how do we make new knowledge? Every year we will evolve this, and getting us closer and closer to nature as an ideal, and nature understanding as maybe one of our core tools within not too much time where we are heading. And also finally, one thing is understanding this, but the enormous effort we have to do on innovation and real new solutions.
Yeah, Freek, you raised your hand, and then Reinhard, I wanted to allow a few questions from the audience as well before we close. Your mic is still mute, Freek.
And very quickly, how to create dynamics. I think we all agree that we need to work together on regulation. And if you look at climate regulation, COP21 was 21 years. So at the international level, things go slow, unfortunately. European level, I think 5 years is realistic. Also for norm standardization, things like that. At national level, changing something is between 1 and 3 years maybe to get a new regulation. But at a city level, the place where we live, where we recreate, where we work, within 6 months, you can do a lot by bringing people together. And I think don't wait for the regulation or the latest climate standard. Circular economy is inspiring, especially at the regional level. Some people can identify with a local sharing hub, but they can identify with a bio-based bridge, a sharing platform, and that's what gives inspiration. Circular economy is tangible in a way. You can identify with it. It's from you, for your area, for your quarter. And that's different than, for instance, the climate discussion, which is about scope 3, which nobody understands. It's about results, maybe 0.5 degrees less in a century. Circular economy can be really our secret weapon in the climate change, because people like it, they can identify with it, can be adopted by politicians. It's inspirational. And I wanted to pass that message along. Just do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes it tangible, the challenge, and how you can sort of deal with the challenge. I think, Freek, having spent more than 10 years in the climate community, I know the power of the circular economy vision and narrative, that you feel there's something I can do myself, but also all the different actors, and that's what makes it so strong, I think. Reinhard, do you have some questions for us from the audience?
Yes, as we only have some minutes left, maybe 2 to 3 questions from the audience. 2 are country specific, so one regarding Germany and the question how circular the new government actually is. Maybe, yeah.
Maybe not enough. This is a short answer.
I mean, it's a question what they promise, and then it's a question what they deliver. But
yeah, but the ambition level. I mean, the ambition. If you see the coalition treaty, I mean, in the last government, it was very hard to identify actors on circularity, and now you have them. So I think you know, the train is moving. It is in the coalition treaty on many different It's sometimes very specific and you wonder why it's so specific and what is about the rest of the picture. But, let's start specific and open it. It's better than having nothing on the radar.
Okay, thank you, Michael. And for the Netherlands, there's also another question. Do the Netherlands have a specific approach to support adoption of new business models, more specifically product as a service and product service systems?
Yeah, thanks, Reinhard, for that question. What we have in the Netherlands is that we have this 5 transition agendas. So biomass and food, buildings and infrastructure, plastics, manufacturing, consumer goods. And we have drafted strategies and implementation plans for each of these sectors. And of course, product as a service is an important aspect. If you specifically look, for instance, at consumer goods, electronics, textiles, it comes back there, but also as a strategy for manufacturing, an elevator as a service from Mitsubishi, for instance. Especially through this operationalization of these 5 transition agendas, we have implemented products as a service. And there are lots of detailed studies, but much more than I can tell you now. We have done quite some deep dives in the topic also at the knowledge level, but I don't have a long list right now for you to share.
Yeah.
Okay, many thanks. So we have another topic in the chat. It's the question why the regional level should engage. And we also answered that partly in the chat. Maybe you, Frick, because you're very active in the chat, also want to provide some more details or a mission statement for regional.
Now, let's say if you can't make cities more sustainable, you can't, let's say, save the planet or reach your climate goals. The action is really local. That's where everything comes together. And when we had our national strategy to be fully circular, that inspired lots of cities. Hey, if we want to be fully circular and we have actions for these 5 transitions agendas, what does it mean for me as a municipality? And that means every self-respecting municipality started drafting plans. And you can imagine that in the agriculture community, let's say the topics will be slightly different than if you are, let's say, at a high-tech environment like the town of Eindhoven, which is more a brain port, if you want. So the fact that these cities made their own plans focusing on their topics, which could be either energy efficiency related or plastic value related or focusing on building materials, that in its sense inspired the local community of businessmen and women to go circular together. They say, hey, if I have €1 to spend, let's do it in a direction where my municipality wants to develop in the next 10 to 20 years. And now you see that after the large multinationals and the young startups, you see that all the family businesses basically have adopted circular economy. And we're now at the point that also the SMEs are starting to embrace it in their community to go circular. And that's exactly what you want. You want things to move further. And that has been stimulated, facilitated by municipality plans. And I think the next couple of years, our government will slightly start to have more stricter targets for each product group, which really makes sure that a larger amount of companies will follow. And the laggards, of course, the people who do not want to move, in the end, I think they will have to be taken out of the market in a way, or business as usual is not an option, as many know. Back to you.
Thank you. Reinhard, I think I would close the questions. Catherine raised her hand, and then I have a final round of my wish list I want to close this session with. But Catherine, you go first.
Very short regarding the regions. It seems like there is a movement where we say maybe the periphery is the new center. We see how regional regions are awakening. You see Finland, you see Slovenia, you see Iceland, and you see Ireland now coming up with the first circular minister in Europe. So there's also some regional aspects, and we will see that there are some kind of awakening to particular maybe problem solving, and also supporting the systemic approach that cities and regions do acquire us to look at change in a holistic way. And finally, if I am like to reach out a hand to see how could actually collaborating with a centerpiece of Europe, Germany, is how could we choose 1 or 2 or 3 value chain, which trains us to look at maybe the car industry across borders, from production market to consumption market. Maybe there are other like topics that really for the next level that we could work at transnational following the market value streams.
So you already started your wish list. This is basically what I wanted to finish with, going in around. Yeah. So yeah, we have this roadmap. We have great centers of work like Michael is heading. What would you, well, from your perspective, what is your wish? What would you like ask Germany, our new government, to do next? So Catherine, you've just mentioned one thing. Do you want to add another?
Yes, actually knowledge collaboration. When I see how you have evolved the methodology for a systemic approach, I would really see how could we co-learn this and see how could this inspire us to actually make a Nordic roadmap for circular economy. This is like a jellyfish at time being, but so that's like the big dream. And also maybe we could just follow the value chain on food and cars and see how could we actually work together on these streams. Germany is one of the most important relevant export markets for most of the Nordic countries.
Mm-hmm. Okay, going around. Michael, next to you.
Well, maybe two wishes. First of all, to really do the national circular economy strategy now and go fast with it. And the second, really to make producers and retailers responsible for the intervention. If they put products on the market, that they are responsible for it and they have to act, you know, because and then they have a repairability model or they have a new service model to take back the stuff. But the responsibility part for me would still be important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Freek, over to you.
Right. Well, when I look at Germany, I see an industrial powerhouse in Europe, and we really need Germany to scale up also circular economy in Europe and maybe even in the world. And traditionally, I see Germany as a super waste management country, the best waste managers in the world. They're really strong in resource efficiency. I'm really jealous of the engineering capabilities of Germans. But circular economy goes beyond resource efficiency. You know, it's not about making a car more efficient. It's about changing mobility. And I think Germany has made the switch that they really focus from resource efficiency to more system change. And I think we need to do that. And Germans like to plan everything ahead, think it over. But as Jacqueline Kramer says, it's a clear path, but it's a clear goal, but not a predetermined path. And that's scary. But I would say Germany needs to do it, especially for the more traditional linear linked industries like automotive or the chemical industry. If one country could do that and set the tone, I think it's Germany. And just do it. You either win or you learn fast, fail fast. And if Germany does not do that, some other companies will do it. If you wait for a perfect world that you can plan and everything is set, starting targets, either we're already doomed or other countries will have taken your place on the market and have taken the automotive market or the chemical market. So I really count on Germany to take the lead. And I think they can do it. If one country can do it, it's Germany.
Thank you. Thank you, Freek, for your strong and empowering words as well at this point. Thank you all for being here, really. Reinhard, a few closing words from you.
I mean, there could be a lot of closing words, yet one sentence I really liked, it was yours, Freek. Common goal, but not a predetermined path. Together with the insight that no country can make it alone. And that was also one of our main reasons why we organized this event. We learned a lot about system level change, about right mix of instruments to get this transition towards a circular economy right. And we learned that we are still at a very early phase in it, right? It takes a long time. Sometimes 6 months are, you can also do a lot in 6 months, but it takes a long time and we are still in a very early phase. So there are also some some follow-up projects we right now from the Circular Economy Initiative consider. Susanne, do you want to give a brief outlook, or is it?
just maybe very briefly, yeah, we look at the implementation questions now, of course, with the circular economy strategy coming up. Metrics, we've talked about it before, is something that we'll look into. And of course, here we need a strong alliance Europe-wide with you as our partners to see what sort of like targets would make sense in the circular economy strategy. And then, of course, we want to make this more hands-on, the knowledge we've gained, the circular business models report. We are developing a card deck to bring this knowledge into, small and medium companies in order to, facilitate this knowledge transfer that we've talked about. So this is something we're looking at. And the building sector, something, the big elephant in the room as well, something we'll look at Akatech, and maybe that'll be a possibility for us to align in our goals as well. Yeah, so with this, we are 2 minutes behind closing time. So thank you very much. Thank you to our audience for staying, for participating in this chat. Thank you all for your lively discussions. I've learned again a lot, and I really hope that I'll see some of you in person soon. Wish you all the best. Stay healthy and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you.